Hi my darlings, and welcome back once again to The Library is Open. So I hope you brought your darlings. That was a really poor attempt at lip syncing, which for someone who does that for a living often is not great. But hey ho, we move. Welcome back. So it's time for another sort of reading wrap up, I guess, reading vlog, if you will. I do think I use those terms interchangeably, and I don't think they actually mean the same thing. But what I mean by this is essentially wrapping up or recapping things that I've read. And as you know, I often like to do this in a thematic way, because I think I'm a sort of subconscious thematic reader. You know, when am I getting glare on those specs? Yes. Take them off then. Very well, thank you. I do sort of tend to gravitate towards things that have similar themes or styles or whatever, and then I go on a little bit of a binge. Maybe that's like a Gemini thing. I know we do that apparently with, I don't know if you believe in astrology or whatever. I strongly sort of identify with my astrological sign, and Geminis are often quite I don't want to say faddy because that sounds bad, but in terms of like things like food, like with the kind of people that can eat very similar foods repeatedly and so on and so forth. So maybe that's what this is. You know, we sort of get fixated and then we move on. But anyway, in the spirit of that, this episode's books are all kind of, I guess, magic orientated. That's why I've called it a kind of magic. And in the sense that they're not sort of rooted in the real world as we understand it at the moment. Yeah, shall we just jump in? I'm gonna do my best to sort of describe the plots of the books that I've read recently in this wrap up, but they almost sort of, what would I say, resist description, because they're the kind of books you just sort of have to read. So I'll do my best with them, because a lot of me trying to explain them might include spoilers. So fingers crossed I managed to avoid that. In which case, well, just pray for me, really. So the first one is one that I've had people have recommended on this channel and I already owned but hadn't got around to reading. And I really wanted this because, well, not only has it been doing the rounds on Booktube massively, but also I really loved the author's previous novel. I don't know why I did like a really dramatic head bob then. Previous novel, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So the author in question, this is on a Clarke, and the novel is Piranesi, which came out, I think this was last year, actually. This is a beautiful edition, by the way, I must say, with the sort of, yeah, it was last year, with the gilt, and then look at that lovely inlay. Now, I'm going to read a little bit of the blurb to you on this, so you can sort of see what I'm talking about when I say it kind of defies overt description. So it says, Piranesi lives in the house. That's our sort of protagonist, Piranesi. Perhaps he always has. In his notebooks, day after day, he makes a clear and careful record of the wonders, the labyrinth of halls, the thousands upon thousands of statues, the tides that thunder up staircases. On Tuesdays and Fridays, he sees his friend, the other. At other times, he brings tributes of food and water lilies to the dead, but mostly he is alone. Then messages begin to appear, scratched out in chalk on the pavements. There's someone new in the house. But who are they and what do they want? Now, so that's kind of, I mean, that's actually, to be fair, that is quite a good blurb that kind of sums up what's going on there. We're sort of plunged instantly into this world that exists within a sort of, I mean, for me, in my head, it looked very much like a stately home, which is the entire world that Piranesi kind of inhabits, and it regularly floods. And there are, you know, an infinite sort of number of rooms that that Piranesi has sort of traversed and transcribed into all these notebooks. You know, and each one has its own characteristic, and there are birds and sort of like sea creatures and so on and so forth. And as the blurb mentioned, there are statues of what Piranesi terms the dead, to whom he leaves tributes, and they all have their individual identities that he's given them. And then he has this friend called the Other, with whom he meets twice a week, and the Other is, you know, elsewhere whenever they're not meeting. So it's almost like he sort of enters the domain, but we're given to understand that he lives in the halls elsewhere, although that may not be true. And the whole thing is sort of told in Piranesi's notebooks of him trying to make sense of, not of where he is, because he sort of accepts where he is and what's happening, but more these mysterious messages that the blurb alluded to. Who wrote them? Why are they there? And then, you know, having conversations with his friend, the other, who claims that there are, you know, he doesn't use this terminology exactly, but sort of bad or other forces that will attempt to bring destruction to him and to the halls and so on and so forth. And it's a bit of a wild ride. Here's the thing, it sounds very confusing, but it's really, really good. Like, I actually, if I'm honest, I'll own that I wasn't completely sure to begin with when I first started reading it, because, and maybe that was my reticence to begin with. I didn't think maybe I was in the place for that kind of, you know, sort of suspend that very human need to rationalize and make sense of things. But it's actually a brilliant book, beautifully told, very simple, very, very brief, and we're dealing with some quite large themes here, and quite I don't mean bad convoluted, but it's quite complex, the kind of I guess the what would I call it, like the schematic for the world and what has actually happened that's led up to the events that we discover in here is really quite complex. And but it's done with such beautifully kind of spare prose that isn't in any way overcomplicated or tries to overtly mystify things that can be told simply. I mean, Susanna Clarke is a really compelling storyteller. I really want to actually go back and visit the TV series of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I didn't get that far with it because I don't like some of the actors, but less said. But maybe I will, just because the level of detail. I mean, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell was a much larger kind of novel and indeed world, but this is equally complex, I believe. And you know, there are some genuine twists that, I mean, maybe other people saw them coming. I really didn't see them all coming. I sort of knew there was some sort of thing going on that we didn't know yet, but when it's actually revealed what the denouement is, it's really beautifully managed and really quite awe-inspiring how those clues have been littered throughout the book, and you can go back and go, that makes sense, you know, one of those kind of things. So really, really recommend this if you fancy, if you're in any way interested in fantasy, or, you know, or in not knowing exactly what's going on for quite a while, which, let's face it, we're all au fait with that given the last year or so. So that's Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. The second one I've had for yonks as well. I didn't pick up the first one of this author's novels, which is The Night Circus, but this one I hauled quite a while ago for the beautiful cover, I'll be honest, and it's The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. And actually, sort of reflecting now, they kind of have, this and Piranesi kind of have a similar setup in terms of there are things already in motion at the start of the novel that you're not aware of, so you kind of have to just give over to the things you don't yet understand and just trust that in time. I've just hit myself in the head there and tried to cover it, did you see? Just have to give over to it and hope that all will become clear, which it sort of does, but it also sort of doesn't in a way, and that's fine. Because I don't think, although I have spoken a little bit earlier then just about the sort of human need to make sense of things, but I don't think we need everything explained, and I don't think everything that we consume artistically or, you know, in a literary fashion, be that theatre, art, whatever, I don't think we have to understand, quote unquote, everything to enjoy it. We can just experience it, you know. Itchy hand now, great. I'm sure this is all the sanitizer, you know, I've had like an itchy hand, either that or I'm due some money. I'd prefer the money, if I'm honest. But so The Starless Sea is about a queer student called Zachary Rawlins, who discovers a mysterious library book in the university library. And he's shocked to discover that it contains details about his own life, as well as several other kind of stories, all of which, spoiler, kind of coalesce towards the end. So he follows the clues inside the book, and he finds himself at this masquerade party in, I think it's London, as I recall, and a secret club, and then he finally ends up in this strange labyrinth beneath the streets. Oh, no, it's not London, it's New York, sorry, not London, New York. He finds himself in this mysterious labyrinth below the surface of the earth, and the labyrinth is a very sort of quirky place, but it's under threat, so Zachary has to make a series of decisions about who is an ally, who is working for him, who would, you know, gladly see him destroyed, in order to save this underground world where the protectors of stories live, basically. I'm doing it a really bad disservice there with that plotline, but yeah, this is sort of about, it's another one of those books that kind of deals with the nature of what storytelling is, and who stories belong to, who looks after stories and how they're constructed and so on and so forth. And it really manages to create this incredibly complex, rich world that manages to make you care even when you don't understand what's going on. Does that make sense? It's really nicely written, I must say, in all credit to Erin Morgenstern. And I've actually read quite a few reviews that said it was like needlessly convoluted and complex and a bit of a turn off in that respect, but I really disagree, because I didn't find it in any way disconcerting that I didn't know exactly what was going on at any one time. I just give over to the story, you know. It does have quite a what's the word, sort of rich mythology behind it, you know, like they talk about like TV series as well, or fantasy book series that have mythologies that are kind of like the rules of how the worlds operate and stuff, that are kind of set up before the actual TV series or book gets going. It has one of those. And there's a lot of having to think for yourself in this, in terms of drawing the connections between the disparate stories, because we sort of get Zachary's plotline, and then I think, as I recall, there's two other plot lines that kind of run alongside it that complement, but it's not, you're not sort of spoon-fed that. You have to kind of go, oh, this is about that, that is about that, this means that. But I actually quite like that, because I don't need to be, you know, nursemaided through my reading or consumption of culture. But then again, maybe that's not for everyone, and that's absolutely okay, because we're all different, aren't we? All have different tastes. But I really enjoyed this. The bee bit is a little bit creepy. I don't mean they're nasty bees or anything like that, but the bee bit is a little bit creepy. I'm not gonna lie. There's a certain amount of peril. So if that's not your thing, maybe this is one not to grab. Maybe I'll have a go with her first novel, The Night Circus, as well. But I don't know. It doesn't, for some reason, this appealed to me more, and I don't know if that's just a design thing or whether it's something else that was descriptive, wasn't it? But yeah, so anyway, I enjoyed this. I thought it was really interesting, and I got through it quite quickly, actually, to say it's quite chunky. What is it like? It's about 400 and odd pages. Oh, it's nearly 500 pages, jeepers. I was optimistic, wasn't I? But with good reason, apparently. So yeah, there we go. That's the Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. The third one I want to just touch on briefly, which I actually don't have a physical copy of because I listened to it on audiobook, was called The Conductors by Nicole Glover, and it's the first in a series of sort of, I don't want to say cozy crime because it's not cozy, but a sort of crime series, if you will, and features the characters Hetty and Benji, who were formerly people who helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad, and are now essentially detectives. And the this is also kind of married with a magical structure that exists in the world, and there's also a caste system to the magic. So white people can use certain types of magic, black people use other types of magic, and they're not allowed to mix, which I thought was a really fascinating and interesting way of looking at segregation and stuff like that through that kind of lens. So lots of, you know, really good historical detail here. This is the kind of first in the series. From what I understand, it's going to be an ongoing series. So this is quite I don't want to say prosaic because it's not. It's very well written, and it was very well read as well, very characterful, which, as we know, is goals when it comes to audiobooks. But this was kind of the sort of setup once you get like the gist of what's going to happen, who the people are, what their relationship is. So it's like one of their friends is found murdered basically in an alley, and it's up to Hetty and Benji to kind of solve that. But we also flash back and forward as well, because we're looking back at their time on the Underground Railroad and helping slaves to escape. And we're also looking for Hetty's sister, who disappeared, and, you know, has never been seen since, and it's like her sort of ongoing search. There's some really interesting character stuff as well with Hetty and Benji, who were sort of given to understand were married more through convenience, and throughout the book we sort of discover that Hetty has actually fallen in love with Benji. And what does that's a really interesting dynamic, where they've sort of married for, you know, a particular purpose, but now she's discovered that she actually really loves Benji, and, you know, that's quite a nice dynamic to play with. The magical elements are well drawn, really well done. Lots of stuff in there about, you know, specific practices, which I believe are drawn from historical records of people who practiced magic in the south, and also the north, and so that's really sort of well done. And like I say, I love that idea of there being a sort of caste or class or race system to the magic, because I think that's a really interesting way to look at what that dynamic of racism looked like in a fantasy sort of setting. So I really liked this. If I had a critique, and I don't think it's really a critique, it just seemed quite long, but then again, maybe that is because I was listening to it on audiobook. So I know you can speed the speeds up, but, you know, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever's reading it, aren't you, in terms of how quickly they read. But that's a really minor criticism and not something that should be levelled at the author. But really interesting new premise for a series, so I'll be proper interested to see where that one goes next. And then finally, just to wrap up, really, we got a non-fiction title, intriguing, by Chris Gosden, and this is called The History of Magic, from Alchemy to Witchcraft, from the Ice Age to the present. And this is an almost scholarly but not overly academic text that deals with the notion of magic in different cultures and societies throughout the world, from the sort of dawn of record up to the present day. And it sort of very systematically goes through each continent of the world, each kind of major culture. So you've got stuff like Mesopotamia and Egypt, Chinese magic, shamanism on the Eurasian steppe, prehistoric Europe, Jewish, Greek and Roman magic, Africa, Australia, the Americas, medieval and modern magic in Europe, and then modern and future magic. And, you know, it looks a lot at discoveries that have been made about civilizations and cultures, but also at practices that were not only sort of around love, sex, deaths in magic, which are the sort of main three sort of not official branches of magic, but they tend to be motivators to magic. And it also looks at the intersections between science, magic and religion, which sort of the author goes back to repeatedly as kind of being the three that he posits need to exist. And it isn't necessarily that magic is, you know, zap or this, that and the other. It's a more complex understanding of what that looks like. So I found it really interesting. You do sort of really need to pay attention to this though. Like, although it isn't overly academic, there's a certain amount of technical information, and rightly so, because I believe the author is Professor of European Archaeology at Oxford. So it's quite systematic and very you know, rich in detail that you kind of have to follow. But there's some really interesting stuff in here that talks a lot about how at base what it's really about is people, isn't it, making sense of the world, which is what religion, science and magic are. People just attempting to make sense of where they are, how they got there, and how they can live healthy, fulfilling, enriching lives. That's really what it's all about at the root of it. And, you know, sort of answer that essential question, why are we here? So be that, you know, through ancestor magic, be that through, you know, fortune telling, be that through shamanism and animal communication and stuff. yeah, that sort of is the kind of backbone of how we all live in many ways. So yeah, if you are interested in that sort of stuff, give this a go, with, as I said, a proviso that it is reasonably technical. Although I didn't find that thing, because I'm not a huge sort of history buff in terms of knowing specific details. I am interested, but I'm not overtly knowledgeable, and I found it fine. So, but it did take me a while. It's a dip in and out book, in my opinion. So yeah, so there we go. So that was A Kind of Magic. I hope you enjoyed that and my vague attempts at doing plot descriptions. Do sound off if any of these sound interesting to you. It's really nice to be back doing these reading wrap-up videos for you again after that little brief hiatus of a fortnight that I took the other week. And I hope you're happy to see me too. But, okay, so for now, put your library cards somewhere safe, my darlings, and give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. Give us a, you know, a cheeky little comment or an emoji, whatever you fancy, if you made it this far. And I hope to see you again very, very soon through the medium of the YouTube. Much love to you all. Mwah.